Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the TALASTASAN, the Art and Creativity Conversation Series. For today, we have an honored guest for us who will be talking about the creative economy, a tale of two cities, Mr. Paolo Mercado. But before we go on ahead with that, may I just please call on our Chancellor, Raimundo Rovillos, PhD, for our opening remarks.
My friend and distinguished guest, Paolo Mercado, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Dr. Corazon Abansi, former Dean of College of Arts and Communications, Dean Elizabeth Kalinawagan, and her class, graduate students, PhD students from Nueva Vizcaya State University. Ayan sila. No? We also have students from the University of the Cordilleras. These are undergraduate students on entrepreneurship. We expect UP Baguio students to be around. I was promised some 30 of them, so I'll be checking attendance later. Okay. Yeah, we will start. I'll be very quick. Our take here as University of the Philippines Baguio in this Creative City initiative is that it's really, I see it as our strategy to push our various stakeholders in the city, including and primarily the local government unit, to think along the lines of sustainable development, sustainable tourism, and really providing employment to our people in Baguio on jobs that are creative, innovative, and sustainable. So that's the reason why we're very much active in this creative city movement. I will call it really a movement now because it has really gone through grassroots organizations and civil society organizations. So, yun lang. Magandang umaga at welcome sa aming magandang Teatro Amyanan. Welcome sa UP Baguio. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, sir, for those words and for getting our movement started. So without further ado, we move on to the main event for today. But before we do that, I'd just like to give a brief introduction of our speaker today. So our speaker for today, Mr. Paolo Mercado, is the president and founder of the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines. From 2016 to the present, the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines is a non-stock, non-profit organization dedicated to helping the Philippines become a globally competitive creative economy. So as Sir said, we start with the grassroots level and he will help us get there from grassroots to global. So for today, he will be talking about the creative economy, a tale of two cities. Let me just give a brief abstract about what he's going to talk about today. So, Mr. Paolo Mercado, President and founder of the Creative Economy Council of the Philippines, will share work in progress, results of a city-based creative industries mapping study. CECP was commissioned by the British Council to conduct this study, which they are doing in partnership with the Asian Institute of Management and UP Baguio. Using the Philippine Culture Statistics Framework, the study aims to develop a heat map of creative industries in two pilot cities. These are Makati and Baguio City. The results of the study is to create awareness for the respective LGUs of the scale and importance of creativity in their respective cities for the purpose of developing policies and programs that enhance their local creative economy. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big welcome for Mr. Paolo Mercado.
Good morning. I will ask for just 30 seconds to switch the machines. Ayan. I think I will also just use the mic separately because so I don't cover the slides. Morning. So perhaps just a brief introduction of myself before I start. I founded the CECP first as part of an academic thesis. So like you, I was a student doing an executive MBA program with the Berlin School of Creative Leadership. So that's a program designed to help people become leaders of creative industries, to learn how to manage creativity as a resource, as a business resource, in fact. And part of the program is we're required to do a thesis. And I looked into the topic of creative economy because at that time, back in 2014-15, it was the first time I heard of the subject of creative economy. So my day job, or what I do as a professional, is I'm actually a marketing person. I was in advertising for many years, for about 12 years, and then 10 years ago, I shifted from advertising into becoming an advertiser inside a big multinational company. So I work for Nestle Philippines. So I'm the chief marketing officer for Nestle as well. And so I bring here an understanding of creative industries, the creative sector, as well as the impact on business. So my subject for today is A Tale of Two Cities. And it's a deep dive into what does creativity look like from a statistical point of view in the cities of Makati and Baguio. And I'll describe why we chose Makati and Baguio in a bit. Okay? Can you still hear me? Okay pa to? Okay. So, before I go into the topic itself, perhaps just an overview of ano ba yung creative economy? People know creative and people know economy, but when you blend the two, what does that mean? Well, first of all, before I start, when you say creative or creative industries, what are the first things that come to mind for people? What specific sectors or what specific industries? When you say creative industry, arts, what else? Crafts, yes, what else? Cultural sectors, film, etc. So it includes those, but actually it also includes the sciences, technology, software development, innovation, research and development are also included. So essentially, when people did a mapping of creative industries around the world, it's worth about $2.3 trillion. This was estimated back in 2015. And it formally employs about 30 million people. It's more than that when you consider the informal sector. It's growing as an industry faster, as an economy, faster than agriculture, manufacturing, and services. And the core clusters are art, design, entertainment, media, and innovation. The key point is that the definition of it is it's an industry where the core of the industry is individual creativity, skill, and talent, which have the potential for generating income, wealth, through the generation and exploitation of intellectual property. Now, that's the most important part. Intellectual property, because when you look at how does creativity make money, there are three levels where creative people make money. The first one, if you imagine it as a tree, the first part that people notice in a tree are the leaves and the fruits. That I would say is like the creative products that people have, whether it's a finished film, or it used to be that people would buy records, those physical objects that people buy, furniture, artwork, fashion. These are the things people buy, and that's part of the revenue of the creative industries. The next one, yung puno niya mismo, the stem, where a lot of these things come from, is the people themselves in terms of service. So service workers in the creative industry. In advertising, you pay for the advertising person to spend time to write your ad, or when you pay a singer a talent fee in a show, that's creative service. You don't own the song that they sing, but they provide you an entertainment service. So that's the creative services part. Pero yung the roots of the value of creative industries are really in intellectual property, the original idea. And the original idea makes money through licensing, royalties, etc. When I was just in a creative economy world conference in Indonesia just this week, and it was very let's say eye-opening that when, for example, countries like the U.S., when they establish, let's say, trade negotiations with another country, one of the most important part of their trade negotiations is IP protection for US-based companies. So meaning Hollywood, they call it the Disneyland clause, the Disney clause, because it is about, if we're going to establish trade, that means you will protect the rights of Disney and other American content companies in all its forms. So bawal ang nagpapirate, bawal ang using their characters without licenses, etc. So this is a very, very important part of the creative economy. Then there are estimates. So this was the first and most recent estimate of how much do creative industries contribute to the world economy. So dito nanggaling yung figure of about $2.3 trillion. And you can see the ranking. Television is on top. Visual arts follows, etc., etc. A lot of it actually driven by advertising revenue. And then you have the number of people that they employ. So on a global scale, this is already being monitored as a very important economic sector. And on a national scale, the United Kingdom was one of the first ones to have a really methodical view on creative industries and creative economy. But if you look at the Asia-Pacific region, these are the countries with formal creative economy agenda. So the most, let's say, advanced one in the Asia-Pacific rim is South Korea. Who here has seen a Korean telenovela? Who here has seen one? Who here has heard or is a fan of K-pop? So at least here, to hear K-pop. That was on purpose. The Korean creative thrust, or the Korean wave that they call it, it started in 1997 during the Asian financial crisis. Before that, Korea's model for the economy was cheap manufacturing. They would take the innovations of Sony and make a cheap copycat. That's what they were doing. Now, in 1997, when the economy collapsed around the Asian region, Kim Dae-jung, their president, said, we have to move out of being a cheap manufacturer. We need to become an innovator and a creator. So they invested a lot in the industries that wanted to innovate. So from an industrial point of view, that became Samsung and LG, which now Samsung, back in 1997, would you say that Samsung could beat Sony? No. Today, Samsung has beat Sony in a lot of the sectors that Sony was leading. And it's also challenging Apple as a global mobile phone player. Then they also said that we also want to push out Korean content. So the way they have done it is it's not just about popularizing individual stars, which is what the Philippines does. May naging sikat, we talk about that individual person. In Korea, they make it an industry. So a K-pop band, name one K-pop band, for example. Huh? You guys know this more than I do. So one of the things that they do, which is different, is that for every K-pop band, siguro there are about, let's take one girl group. If there are 8 girls on stage, actually there are about 60 girls behind that group na kapag merong if you have 3 shows, different girls can actually perform in 3 different places under the same band name. Ganun sila. So their number and their songs are rehearsed so that it becomes actually a product. So they multiply the content of the performers in that way. It's really a factory for them. They're very, very methodical in the way they do it. And while we are getting K-pop influence here, where K-pop actually makes a lot of money is in mainland China. It's the Chinese who really consume a lot of K-pop. And you see strategies like that all over the region. Japan has been exporting anime and manga for some time. They are also exporting, in a very methodical way, food. And their idea is they will create interest for one type of food at a time. In the 1970s, it was tempura. In the 1980s and 1990s, it became sushi. And then now, what they're beginning to promote is ramen. But all of that, and other more unique food like okonomiyaki, yes, that one. But the whole point about it is that they create interest, they put in TV shows about Japanese food in order to get tourists coming to Japan, and then it contributes to the local economy. So very methodical as well. And then when you have China, China is about moving from made in China to designed in China. Thailand, they brought in the Italian design school from Florence, and they gave them a campus in Bangkok because they want the Thai fashion design to be as prominent as Italian fashion design. Then you have Design Singapore, you have Malaysia producing animation content as well, and then Indonesia, which was the first one to have 2 UNESCO creative cities back in 2015, and they are also the first one to establish a creative economy agency that is a direct report to their president. So a lot of things happening in the region. But what about the Philippines? So the Philippines, there are a lot of individual efforts, but we don't have yet a comprehensive government strategy or budget to drive the creative economy. But here are just some things to set the context of why we are doing the city-based mapping. So first of all, the last estimate done for the Philippines on the value of creativity, and here are the sectors on the core copyright-based industries. So from press and literature, music theater, motion picture, radio, television, photography, software, visual arts, and graphics, it's about, in total, the 460 plus the 2 others, it's about 640 plus billion pesos, or more or less 7% of the economy. That's as big as that's almost as big as the BPO industry. But when you talk about BPOs, everybody talks about BPOs, and you know what a BPO cluster looks like. But do people know what a creative cluster looks like? So yun, wala. But currently, it's already very significant as a contributor. And it's also growing very fast. The average growth rate for the last 10 years, from 1999 to 2010, was close to 13%, double the growth of the Philippine economy. The number of jobs is about 530,000, but it doesn't count the freelancers. And when you're looking at the creative economy, actually, for the Philippines, freelancing is one of the biggest contributors. But it's unmeasured. It goes under the radar. So there was a study that was done just this year by PayPal, counting the number of freelancers in the Philippines who are taking revenue from freelance work from the US. Then there are brands like Upwork or Behance, or another one which is relatively new, Design Pickle. These companies, they're US companies, but they actually have significant numbers of Filipino freelancers contributing freelance work to these platforms. I saw Design Pickle doing their recruitment in one of the hotels in Manila, and there were about 1,000 people lining up to show their work and to qualify as a designer for Design Pickle. So outsourcing, creative outsourcing is happening, but very different from BPO outsourcing, which is very formal, located in these 24/7 BPO clusters. Ang creative outsourcing is happening more at the freelance level. So This is why we set up the Creative Economy Council. What we wanted to do is partner with the Philippine government, and we set out an ambition. And the ambition, it's written quite small, is that by 2030, we want the Philippines to be the #1 creative economy in the ASEAN region. ASEAN muna, the top 10. Why? Because I believe that the Philippines has a right to play when it comes to creativity. We are as creative or even more creative than, definitely more than Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, etc. But somehow we need to get our act together. To be able to drive this vision, we have a 6-point agenda that we are pushing. I'm not going to detail the whole thing. I'm only going to talk about one. But the 6 agenda points are policy, getting the laws and the government budgets in place to start driving the creative economy. Second, creative industries. There are a lot of creative industries, but which one do we prioritize to invest in so that we become global players in these industries? The third one is creative clusters and creative cities. That's the fourth one. I'm going to talk about this for the rest of the discussion. Creative tourism is very important. This is why we're doing the Creative Festival. The Entacool Festival, we're starting it primarily as a local festival for the people of Baguio and for people to visit Baguio. But the ambition is to make it an international creative festival. That people from around the world will come to Baguio for the Entacool Festival. And finally, creative education, which is something that Chancellor Rovillos really wants to drive. That we become not just educating our own creative talent pool, but that the Philippines becomes a center for creative education around the ASEAN region as well. That people will come here because the creative education from the Philippines is better than what they could get from their respective countries. That's the ambition. So I'm going to focus the discussion for the next 20 or so minutes on creative cities, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, dialogue. Why are creative cities important? Well, essentially, creative people, they are attracted to places that nurture them. And if a place does not nurture them, they will leave. So the whole point is that creative places attract creative people. There are many books and writers that talk about this. So from Richard Florida, The Rise of the Creative Class, to John Hawkins, who was the first one to write about creative economy. So he talks about creative ecosystems or creative ecologies. And Charles Landry, who was also one of the key thinkers in terms of creative city. So I'll just add 2 slides from Richard Florida. So he's the one who wrote about the rise of the creative class. So he is really pointing out that there is an economic link between creative people living in a city and the economic performance of that city. That if you have more creative people in a city, they actually lift the economic potential of that city. And when creative people leave, it actually sinks the economy. So the key point he makes, and I like this quote, that communities or cities need to be brain gain places and not brain drain. So that's the question that we need to ask our own cities. Is Baguio a place that is brain gain? Does it attract talent that stays? Or is it brain drain? That creative people want to leave Baguio and not to live in Baguio. So that's a question. And then if you become an attractive creative city to creative people, how do you then harness that creativity to impact the city? So that's the whole logic of why we are focusing not just on national creative economy statistics, but city-based creative statistics. Okay. Now, this is a last-minute addition that I asked the permission of RR to include. It was supposed to be Tale of Two Cities, but may singit ako ng one more city as a point of inspiration. This is the city of Bandung. So parang Tale of Three Cities. This is the third one na singit. So Bandung is in Indonesia. It is the first creative city. Sorry, is it the first? It's their second creative city that they got into the UNESCO list. It is a city that in many ways, and they got it for one of the hardest categories. Because when you apply for UNESCO Creative City, you have to choose a category. Baguio is a creative city for craft and folk arts. There are others that are creative city for music or for film. They chose a very difficult category, which is design. Because in design, you're competing with very big powerhouses in terms of the other countries that are here, like Berlin, for example, or Turin, which is automotive capital of Italy. So, what is Bandung? So, I haven't been there myself, but I met the people from Bandung. And actually, the way they describe it is Bandung is like the Baguio of Indonesia. So really, yes. Because number one, it is also in a high place. It's 700 meters above sea level. And the temperature range is like Baguio, 19 to 23 degrees on average. It has more people, but it's also since the 1930s the epicenter of certain crafts and industries, particularly fashion and culinary. And tourism. It's a hospitality city, and it's an educational center as well, with 120 universities there, 400 vocational centers. So it has an ecosystem, and domestic tourism. It's about 150,000 visitors each weekend. So there's a lot of similarity between Bandung and Baguio, and the way they talked about it is that it has an ecosystem. It has creative people, the creators who produce creative products that then are sold to a market, and they have enough visitors to sustain that creative market. But then they have R&D, research and development, that then adds value back to the creative products. So this is a cycle that's very interesting for Baguio to reflect on. Baguio certainly has the creators and the products, but does Baguio have really sufficient access to markets that sustain these products? And does Baguio have R&D and innovation for its products that keep them interesting and upwardly developing? So those are the self-reflective questions. Two initiatives from Bandung that I will share, and then I'll come back to Makati and Baguio. So one is the fashion industry. Their fashion industry, they're a back room for brands like Nike or H&M. So Nike and H&M, they produce, like factory garment work in Bandung. But what they said is that it's not adding to the creative economy because it's only labor, but it is not actually adding skills and design skills to the people who work in those industries. So how can they transform it? And then when you look at previously where the work happens, you have these big garments factories, but they live in slums, in slum areas, which are really a contrast to the kind of high-value products that they create. Because when you look at H&M and you look at Nike, these are quite high-value products, especially Nike. So one of the key initiatives that they've done is that they have to get to put together a what they call a fashion laboratory, where it is not just about manufacturing, but it teaches those who work in the garments industry to design and to innovate. And they got those brands like Nike and H&M, plus other design advocates from the Netherlands, etc., or from Denmark, to invest in creating a design laboratory. So the photo here is work in progress. But they're building this inside the garments district of Bandung to be able now to teach the craft of design, so that the workers move from being just labor to eventually becoming designers themselves. So this is the idea behind Bandung. Then the other one is, there was one area where there was a lot of arts and crafts happening. And they said that, but how can we put Bandung on the map? So essentially, first they did a number of things that allowed people, they designed the neighborhoods that allowed people to, really enjoy the place and see it when you're walking through the streets, that it's a creative neighborhood. And they designed interactive games for millennials to be able to find where the creative places are. But the boldest thing they did was they actually made Bandung, this area of Bandung, visible from essentially a satellite view. So they redesigned their neighborhoods so that they become very vibrant design spaces. But the one that I found most inspiring was this: they created an aerial picture by painting the roofs of the district in their creative area, so that they can now mark it as this is where Creative Bandung lives. So it's what it says is .bdg, .bandung. So, and they literally painted, this is not computer generated, that's the real photo of the area, such that now, when you want to find the creative district of Bandung, oh ayan na, no big monuments, just paint, to be able to show where creativity lives. And because of this, it has inspired the people in that area to really live and promote creativity where they are. So, this is the project that we are doing. This is a bit now, I go medyo academic, okay? Methodology muna, and why we're doing it this way. So, we've had, or the NCCA is tasked with what's called the Philippine Culture Statistics Framework. So it's a framework of how do we measure the creative and cultural sectors across the country. And our view as CECP and working with our partners, AIM and Baguio, is that it's very difficult to do this on a national level. Can we try to do it at a city level first? So the two cities that we chose are Baguio, of course, because it's the first UNESCO creative city for the Philippines, but we also chose Makati. Why Makati? Because it's the financial capital. Because saying it's only a financial capital, but we're saying that no, actually it has a very strong creative sector as well. And you'll see that in a bit. And our method was we wanted to go first through city records. The core city records is the BPLO, Business Permits and Licensing Office. So we had to knock on the door of the mayor and the city council to give us access to the records and to really count how many creative businesses are there that we can see. Our second level then would be to contact the industry associations and ask, why are you in Makati or why are you in Baguio? What makes Makati or Baguio a city that nurtures your creativity? And then we have a mapping of those that are registered and unregistered, and we're going to share a heat map as well of that. So let me start first very quickly with Makati, and then I'll go to Baguio. Okay. So Makati, this one, okay, this is just a methodology on going through the business and permits, and then we haven't started phase 2 yet on the qualitative deep dive. So what I'll share is primarily on the first phase of the quantitative mapping. There are about 37,000 businesses in Makati. So there's a lot to cover on this. And what we saw is that the creative industries, formally registered creative industries, comprise about 3% of the total. There were some, so let me just give an overview of some of the challenges and initial findings. So this is what we got: business name, where are they located, and what's the nature of the activities. Actually, the BPLO had much more data that they were hesitant to share. So some of them, for example, was a number of employees. They were saying they were hesitant to share because they said that's unreliable, because the businesses only give you number of employees when they register. They don't update number of employees. So if a business grows, they have no clue if of what that number is. The second thing that they were hesitant to share, point number 5, is how much do these businesses earn? So there is a declared revenue, but they say from a data privacy point of view, they cannot share that. But for us, we're trying to still resolve it in terms of anonymized data, because it's important for us to see how much do the creative sectors contribute to the economy. The other one also, I mean, in number 6, it's a bit heavy, but let me put it this way. there is a national code for classifying different industries. The problem with Makati is that they have their own code. They have their own way of coding their businesses. So the challenge with this one is that while it can give us a good view of Makati, we cannot compare the Makati data with the Baguio data. Because if each city begins to define their own code classification of businesses, it's very difficult to get cross-comparison and consolidation. So that's already an issue that we will be raising to the Philippine Statistics Agency authority to be able to, how do we harmonize creative data? These are more minor problems. I'm going to skip this. I'll provide the full report to Chancellor Ray for people to download and review as a PDF file. So here's an initial finding, and I'll put it more visually. So there are about 1,600 creative businesses registered in Makati. Those 1,600, if you look at the distribution, A, B, C, and D sectors only comprise a total of less than 30%, okay, of the total group. 73% of the creative businesses in Makati are actually in the what are called the creative services sectors. So audiovisual broadcast and interactive media and creative services like advertising are there. I will also highlight two specific sectors. I'll project na lang. So the two specific sectors are game and software development, 573 businesses, and advertising, 372 businesses. So while you have the totality of Makati, there are two very big sectors there. The advertising one, I can tell you, I came from the ad industry. This is true. Most of the ad industries are located, ad agencies and production agencies are located in Makati to be close to the clients. Okay? So to be very close. So that's an obvious part. The surprise for us is game and software development. So this is a deep dive. And I can tell you already one thing that we are suspecting because it's a very large number. So definitely there are software developers and game developers in Makati. But there is also apparently another sector that uses game development in its license, but it's actually operating in another way. And this is the online gambling. The Chinese online gambling operations. And we're detecting that some of them are using the game development license to be able to operate. And you'll see that's the next phase for us to actually deep dive to understand. So this is a very busy map, but essentially we took the domains A to F that I showed earlier, and then we started to map which barangay in Makati are they located. So this is very complicated because we're trying to put all of the sectors there. But let me focus on the two biggest sectors and the two specific industries. So this is the audiovisual and broadcast. And where you're seeing a concentration of about 90 to 100 businesses are in the San Lorenzo and Bel Air villages. So they're highly, highly concentrated in a very specific barangay. And you see the same picture, although the advertising one tends to be spread out, the creative services a bit more into those specific barangays. If you deep dive just into that sector, this is the game development sector, game and software development, where it's really concentrated on San Lorenzo Village. And those from San Lorenzo Village, if you start to understand it only as game developers, they don't understand it. When you talk about online gambling, then they really understand it because they say yes, that there are neighborhoods in San Lorenzo being taken over by a lot of these operations. Yes. Then advertising, very similar, but a lot more spread out in the outskirts. You still have primarily San Lorenzo Village and Bel Air, but it is more spread out around. Now, why is this important? Why are we mapping it neighborhood by neighborhood? Here in Baguio, can you identify the BPO centers? Yes, you can. Diba? Physically, you see where they are, you see the buildings, and it identifies itself as a cluster. In fact, Mega World calls them BPO townships, and they have a model for how they should operate. Have you seen an advertising cluster in Makati? And I can tell you no. It's not visible because they are inside standard traditional office spaces. And have you seen advertising production houses? They're actually, some of them literally located in a house. But you don't have studios, you don't have districts of advertising. And because you don't have that space, it doesn't qualify for PEZA zone incentive, Philippine Economic Zone incentives, because they're kalat. And so the idea behind it is, can you start to cluster these industries and qualify them for PEZA incentives? That's the strategy. Some limitations on the nature of the activities are difficult to compare in terms of the data. The government agencies collecting the statistical data don't really call out creative industries. So it's new classifications that we need to drive. The list provided by Makati based on primary economic activity, it doesn't capture other activities. So it may be that you are let's say you classify yourself as a marketer, but actually a lot of the things that you do is more in the creative area. So then the rest of it is learnings that we have. Now, I'll skip through this and jump essentially to the findings for Baguio. Okay, so this is the team that has helped us for the Makati part. So Baguio. Baguio is fun, to collect the data. First, Baguio, this is really the working group that Chancellor RR together with now COO Venus Tan and the working group really pushed for Baguio to be part of the UNESCO Creative Cities Network. Because at the time that we started this in 2007, there was no Philippine city included in the UNESCO map. We were behind. A lot of our ASEAN neighbors were already there. So in a very concerted effort, it took us less than 60 days to put together the narrative and the application. But because the story of Baguio was so strong, they easily accepted it. So by October 31 last year, Baguio was included. So if you look at the UNESCO website, it's already there. Of course, the little dot is not accurate, but at least the Philippine map, we're already there in the sector, the orange sector of craft and folk arts. And yes. Okay. Now, part of the task now is, okay, together, actually the UNESCO Creative City designation is also a commitment of the city of Baguio to drive forward programs that encourage creativity and the arts. And these are commitments, because if Baguio doesn't meet these commitments, it can lose the designation. So that's why now there is actually a pressure for the Baguio city government to do these programs. One of the programs is, in fact, the measurement of the creative sector. So the methodology part, I won't dwell on it, very similar. But let me talk about first the quantitative mapping that we did. So the first set of data is from the business licensing office of Baguio. And this is about 200 businesses registered. And in terms of looking at the registered businesses, you see immediately that souvenirs is the majority of the sector. So because they have to sell. So and most of these, I don't even think that they're the manufacturers. I think these are the retailers. Those who sell the souvenirs. Those who make them are probably under the other areas. So I'm also very curious about the 1% that is under curiosity. So that's the business licensing data. We also had other data from DTI and from the Baguio Arts and Crafts Creative Council. And we put this together in a consolidated distribution of about 217 different sectors. And essentially, if you look at it in terms of number of people and establishments, artists are the majority, followed by the craft workers, and then you have about 7% in terms of spaces like Museo Cordillera or Bencab Museum, etc. So these are the more creative spaces. We further broke it down into are these individuals or are these business enterprises? And not surprisingly, for Baguio, unlike Makati, which is business-led, Baguio is more individual-led. You know, a lot of individuals here, primarily in the arts. Crafts, you do have business enterprises there, much more, and a lot of this much more on retailing. And then the other sectors are quite small in terms of the art spaces, museums, and galleries. Now I'm going to go into the qualitative phase, and this is very preliminary on our findings. So there was an interview. We tried to get equal 35-35 for arts and crafts. We got a bit more on the arts category, 39 interviews there. So based on those interviews of the 74 people, this was the distribution of what they were working on already. So, sorry, this is a focus on the 35 for crafts only. And if you look at the distribution for crafts, contrary to my first expectation, woodworking is actually bigger than weaving as a sector, although weaving seems to be more organized as a group. Metal craft is still quite big. Basket weaving, leather making is also there. What is not there, and perhaps something to consider, because it's not yet organized as a craft or an art, is tattoos. The tattoo craft is not visible, at least in this part. Are they registered and unregistered? Almost equal. So the blue line is the total, the gray line is, the orange line is registered, the gray line is unregistered, and it's almost equal in terms of the businesses in the craft sector that is registered versus unregistered. In terms of the arts naman, so visual arts, painters are the majority here. You have a few in theater, dance, and music. So that's the big distribution. Unlike in the craft sector, the majority in the art sector are unregistered workers because they're individuals as a group on this one. And so if we contrast this with Makati, I don't have a consolidated map of the two, but Makati was more on the services side. And Baguio is much more on the originator side. And because we were working a lot with the qualitative, we saw a lot more, in fact, in the unregistered sector coming in. We also did a, hindi lang maganda yung contrast, but where people are concentrated, arts and crafts do have their centrality around Session Road and Burnham Park, so the commercial area. So that's not so surprising. What is unique to crafts is the big concentration around Asin Road, over here. So there is a craft center that is quite separate from that other sector. And there's a small cluster for arts as well happening. I don't know exactly what this district is over here. I think it's around the Camp 7 area already. I'm not sure. Let me qualify that. Okay. So this is the sectors. Now, the last part that I'll share is on the ecosystem and challenges faced by the different sectors. So for crafts, they talk about really the challenge first of getting the right value for the work that they do. So it's always about Baguio is known for the craft pero binabarat yung souvenirs, So it earns very low profit and demand is very seasonal. And it's very hard for them to capitalize, to be able to make and then to sell. Suppliers, they complain about both a lack of suppliers and therefore very expensive input. Because if you have very few suppliers, then it becomes a supplier's market on this area. Space is a challenge. Space for working, space for storing inventory, and space for, the costly space of workplace and retailing. Personnel, it is getting harder and harder for the crafts industry to get young blood in, and there is very little training and support being given to the craft center. For the customer side, appreciation of the clients are very limited. There's a very limited market for handmade items, and the attitude of the clients, especially, it's very difficult to do commissioned work because the process is tedious, but then binabarat yung artist or yung craftsman in this case. Industry competition is very intense. There's a proliferation of tiangge type products. So essentially, crafts competes with ukay-ukay and Chinese imports as well. International, so products, especially silver products from China, are flooding the market and challenging the local craft work on this. And government limited or selective support from LGUs for handmade products, and limited or selective support for micro entrepreneurship. Other challenges include legal, in terms of the difficulty of the registration process, access to art markets, and business operations. Then we have the arts. The arts also, let's say, share a similar challenge in terms of the valuation of their products, personal security, and sustainability, because a lot more of the artists are self-employed. So getting the same coverage and protection and benefits as employed people is a bigger highlight for them. Again, also a challenge in terms of supplies, similar challenges in terms of space, but less so than the crafts because they're mas madaling i-store yung flat work kesa yung the big craft work. Industry competition, there's very low patronage internationally for locally produced art. There is some concern raised on plagiarism. Government representation also is there. Business operations, transporting artwork, which are much more sensitive to damage. So that's why also, even though there are those events in Manila, like art fair, art in the park, Baguio has to think very carefully how they participate because of the potential damage. Reliability on online platforms, online images of artworks, they don't really give justice to the actual end pieces. I'll dwell a little bit on this one. So group association, they were actually quite vocal about this area. That there are certain associations that don't thrive. Music associations don't last very long in Baguio. There's a lot of internal conflict. And there's also, we're seeing a generational gap. Because while Baguio is very pioneering in establishing the Baguio Arts Guild, it seems that some of the younger artists are feeling alienated in this area. And it's hard for new people or the young artists to get their artwork displayed. So merong exclusivity even with the art group. And then selling and marketing the arts, it's a difficult task that people don't really have, that haven't mastered yet. They talk about the share cut to the galleries, which they find unfair at 50-50, and the lack of skills, essentially, in art and art marketing. Yeah, Manila is much higher. Yeah, 30-70. 30 to the artists. Final set na lang, the challenges that we're facing, that we faced, that our researchers faced in Baguio. There was a lot more hesitancy to share. This is not from me. This is from my research partners. So they had quite a bit more apprehension of being interviewed. Some of it availability, consistency of responses. So some of the things that they would put in the written document were inconsistent with what they would say in the interview. Interview fatigue. So maybe we've been doing a lot of research on creative industries kasi some of them responded, na-interview nyo na ako but they don't realize it's a separate research. And topic perception, there were a few that were uneasy na creative city kami pero hindi naman kami kinonsult. May mga ganong feedback that we have. Focus, the questionnaires were designed on the economic aspect for it. But there were certain things that they felt that weren't covered sufficiently, like staff retention or how to find the right staff. And some suggested details, of course, same concerns on privacy. Location, and I think this is important though for Baguio mapping, that a lot of the creative sectors in Baguio, actually, we need to expand it to BLIST, because the other areas contribute a lot to the creative sector of Baguio. Then at this time also, in terms of there's a limited database available in Baguio, much less than Makati. And in terms of the weather, unfortunately, some part of the research was going on while Typhoon Ompong was happening. I'll skip this part on phase 1. And the next step for us is really to try to sift through the data and get a bit more methodical in terms of the analytics. So let me just close with this. It was pointed out to me that's not Baguio. Okay, I'm conscious of that, but I only chose it because it sort of echoes the Bandung initiative that was done. So, in summary, and then I'll open it up to the floor. In Makati, what we found is that it's a very highly developed financial capital with a lot of hidden creativity. Creativity is, you don't call Makati a creative city, but there are pretty significant creative sectors happening there. The biggest sectors, as was pointed out, advertising, digital games and software, and audiovisual production. But they're very scattered, with some concentration in Sanlo, Poblacion, and Bel Air, but there's no real creative cluster. The statistics-wise, city codes do not align with the national code, and data transparency issues from the government versus data privacy. We need to resolve that to really get a solid mapping. And the unmeasured contribution of freelancers. Not only online freelancers, but a lot of these businesses actually contract freelancers as well for work. For Baguio, it is known as a tourism and education city. It is newly designated as a creative city, and it's recognized for its creative people, but what about the organization of the creative industries? So it has a very vibrant cultural and artistic and artisanal sector, but the quantitative data is quite lacking. It's very hard to get. A base of 217 businesses and individuals is the data set that we have, but I'm sure there are more than 217. I'm pretty sure of that. But how do we get to that quantitative level for Baguio? Baguio talks more about a struggle for sustainability, for economic sustainability. If you read through the feedback in the crafts and arts sector, it's really more fundamental. How do we get the value chain going for those sectors? And uncomfortable at the same time with commercialization. They have to sell, but they are uncomfortable with the business side of it, the margins, commercializing of art, etc. There is need to strengthen the value chain to support the creative sector. And there's need to also build trust and unity within the sector. Between LGU and creatives, there's mistrust of government and also a mistrust of outsiders doing activities within Baguio. So there's a bit more on the soft side of Baguio that needs work for it to flourish as a creative community. And on the value chain side, this is the one where potentially programs on incubation and business model development can help. So the last couple of things that I'll share is that I go back to Richard, Florida. What's the point of creative city strategy? It's about how does the city become attractive, and then how does the city retain creative talent? And through attraction and retention of creative talent, it would help uplift the city's economic profile. I will end with one quote. The one who quoted this to me was actually now national artist Kidlat Tahimik. When he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm mapping quantitatively the economic sectors of Baguio, the creative sector of Baguio." But you have to remember this quote from Albert Einstein. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that's counted truly counts. So yun lang po. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think I speak for the rest of us when I say that when we heard that Baguio was declared a creative city, we were proud because it felt it was something important, but we truly didn't know what it meant. And thank you for shedding light on what it actually means right now. So while you were talking, I was filled with hope for my city that we can become global, but at the same time, we face a lot of challenges. So to open the floor for questions for Mr. Paolo Mercado, may I please call on Ma'am Cora to do the honors. Ladies and gentlemen, VCAA Corazon Abansi.
Thank you. So, and thank you very much, Sir Paolo, for your presentation. Nung sinabi nila na I will do the honors of facilitating the open forum and to give a reaction on the paper, sabi ko, nako, hindi naman ako talaga expert sa creativity, but of course it's an honor to do that. And when he talked about Bandung, there was some memory there kasi I had been there. But tama yung nung nandoon ako, ang alam ko lang sa Bandung, aside from yung mga partnership with universities na ginawa ko, is it's the Paris of the East, and therefore you do a lot of shopping there. So, and when I went there, pangit. Pupunta ka lang para mga factory outlets lang yan. So ngayon pala ganon. So I think yung mga students, we can have a field trip there. Yeah, di ba? Dapat pupunta tayo doon para makita natin. Pati ang mga students din ng Cordilleras and ng Nueva Vizcaya, we might have good educational tour and see and compare with what we have. So, maganda yung ating na-witness ngayon because we have a little information about creativity in all over the world. We had information about Asia, and then we zero into the Philippines and specifically to two cities, Makati and Baguio. Similar because they do creative work, but their platforms are different because nakita natin Makati is more on advertising, game apps, ganyan. Ang Baguio naman is more on the folk arts and crafts. Pero at iisa rin yung challenge, di ba? Nakikita natin very creative ang kanilang mga platforms, and lagi namang alam natin na creative industry would always fuel economic growth, and it would be a driver for innovation, so meaning new jobs, new entrepreneurs, and revitalize local artisans. Pero the challenge is bigger kasi nga the challenge, as Mr. Paolo has pointed out, is appropriate policies to support and maximize the value from creative industries is not yet in place. And therefore, lalo na kung sa Baguio, kung mag-zeroin ako sa Baguio, kasi syempre taga Baguio tayo, ganon, very, very strong yung implication for the academe to be an instrument towards this, lalong-lalo na dun sa data adequacy. So the mapping that has been done by the project is an important stepping stone para magawa natin yung mga appropriate policies that will be the support for our industries. And very important ang role natin, University of Cordilleras, University of the Philippines, University of Baguio, and all other universities, we must develop a creative learning ecology so that lahat ng mga kulang para ma-move natin ang ating creative industries forward, sa atin mag-i-incubate. In other words, we must have an innovation hub. At ang ating chancellor ay yan na yata yung next niyang rarara. So, an innovation hub. So, yon ang aking parang aking rally for all of us, lalong-lalo na sa academe. I think we should have a very, very big role in making Baguio a creative city because sa atin dapat manggagaling ang mga important data and information that should lead to a stronger policy, an appropriate policy to make Baguio a sustainable creative city. So, matapos ang aking talumpati, ayan na, kayo naman. Sino naman ngayon ang may gustong magtanong sa ating speaker, kay Sir Paolo Mercado? Okay, so clap daw kayo para sa akin. Ayan. So we have one who would like to ask a question. Pwede bang, ayan, merong microphone para mas marinig ng lahat. Sir, introduce yourself muna ha, and from where are you, ano iyong affiliation or kung ano man yung gusto mong sabihin para makilala ka naman namin.
Sige po. Sir, my name is Jake Espiritu. I'm one of artists here in Baguio, based.
Morning, Jake.
Yes. I travel Makati and Baguio. I actually perform in Makati, so I see what's going on there. My question is, yung gentrification ng business side.
Yes.
So we've seen a lot of that, say, in Bushwick, New York,
Yeah.
where they started with the street art.
Yes.
So street art there promoted yung economy nung lugar. But when the advertisers came in and we saw that advertising is the first one sa listahan that promotes creative economy, my fear is hindi kaya kapag we push for the creative economy here in Baguio, that the gentrification would happen and mahihirapan na yung mga locals for rental kasi yun yung that happened to San Juan, La Union too. It's now going on right now because of the surfing
Yes.
So
yes.
I think is there a way that we could discuss that yung
It's so thanks for the question. It's one of the more complicated dynamics that when a place becomes very popular, then it does raise the real estate value. Now, it's very difficult to let's say control that without two things. The first one is a very clear support from the LGU on protecting essentially cost of living spaces for artists and artisans, and also that the developers are also in recognition of that. The problem is that when a space becomes popular, the first to move are developers to quickly buy out underutilized spaces and then raise the property value, which then drives out the creative community. It is a global challenge. No one has really comprehensively resolved it, but I think the neighborhood-based activation that are partnerships with the LGU and with that creative community helps that, because at least it recognizes that it's a place where creative people should live. So I don't have a comprehensive answer, but in creative economy literature, they already distinguish gentrification, which is now considered a bad word, from regeneration. And regeneration needs to be inclusive. It is about making it more lively while still retaining the character of the area. Yes, but it's a challenge. There are areas, Poblacion is now beginning to suffer that same thing as well.
Thank you, sir. May I add po?
Sure, yes.
What we see here, me and our group, small group lang naman of the unadvertised side of Baguio, see that it's the identity of Baguio that is lacking here.
Hi.
I think that we personally think that the quest for the identity of Baguio would unify yung mga artists with all the internal conflicts going on here.
Yes, I would agree with that. One of the things that impressed me most, this is the full deck from the Bandung people. I've shared this with Chancellor RR also. Is their first step was actually city identity and city branding. And they did make this a collaborative effort, that they had to define what is their vision for the city, and what are the values that they need to uphold as they push the creative city agenda forward, that they need to stick to a certain vision and a certain set of values. And this does need to be an inclusive exercise. Perhaps it's one of the things that the Baguio Arts and Creative Council should really lead, but make a very inclusive exercise. But thanks for the input. It is quite essential.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, are there other questions for Sir Paolo? Ayan.
Hi, good morning. Belle
morning.
from MM. In this age of information and commodification, how can the artists or the creative idea sources can be protected? Because once we push for the economics of such cities, sometimes the clients would bargain. That's right. Not just in Baguio, but also in Makati.
Yeah.
I myself is a voice talent, and they would always tell, kaya na ng 5,000 yan, or kaya na ng 2,000. And I've heard that there are councils and organizations already that are trying to protect these artists. But how can we further protect these artists from being abused by companies?
That's a very tough question. Thanks for it. So the question on protection is primarily on fees for creative
Fees, yeah,
fees.
because of the intellectual properties. Like whenever we apply for licenses, well, there are applicable fees. But there are also companies who would just say, hindi ka pa naman sikat, so pwedeng ito na lang muna yung fee mo. But actually, there has to be a minimum pay for all of these talents. Because either way, they are providing sources of ideas to these companies.
Yeah. What I'm trying to get at is I'm trying to answer specifically in the sector that you're in, which is voice talent.
Yes.
And voice talent, because there are two ways. There's one, I don't know how well organized, let's say the sector is in terms of negotiating as a group,
Right.
or providing a let's say a group level. I mean, it's the same with how trade unions were developed, that they negotiate for minimum wage, and that's how those lobby groups formed. There is definitely a lack of those kinds of associations in the Philippines for the creative sectors, that there should be a minimum for, if you're singing talent, there needs to be a minimum fee. Because the problem is when trade associations try to do that, and they're always, I wouldn't say the best way, but the more effective way of implementing standardization of fees. But the problem actually is that the sector sometimes sabotages itself. That there's an agreed trade fee, and then merong artist or independent worker who's not part of it that then agrees on a lower fee, and then people go to that person. So there does need to be a unified approach to the industry, and not just because when you try to approach this at an individual level, you're not going to get far. You need to be forming or to be part of an industry group that then negotiates this at that level. That there are set fees for certain kinds of services. The challenge with that, though, first, that needs to be done at a domestic level, but eventually the challenge with that is you have to be conscious about what is the Philippine rate of doing this service versus a Thai rate of doing this service. And that's where it needs to balance, where fair wage to creative workers needs to be at a price point that still makes it attractive to do the creative work in the Philippines. The advantage of the Philippines, though, is that there's no alternative to English language voice talent in the ASEAN region. That we're really the best at providing that work. But you're right about how do you negotiate for it, and that's the main input that I have.
Thank you, sir. And last, to
Sure.
relate that with China as the source of fake goods, probably.
Yeah, yes.
And we have American and European products. Would you consider that as getting cheap services versus the authentic ones?
I understood the point on China. I didn't get the point on the American and
Yeah, because there's a
European.
branding, like if you get your goods from America or in Europe, you get quality services, or products. But if you go to China, you get it mass produced. Would you consider that the same as going to Baguio and getting authentic services or goods as opposed to getting it somewhere else, which is cheaper?
Okay. I think it comes back to two things. First, the vision and the values that Baguio wants to embrace. And then from those vision and values, what sectors will it promote and what kind of products? I know it's an indirect way of answering your question, but the point is, where do you want to really compete as a city? What are the sectors that will make you distinct from not only other cities in the country, but other cities in the region? The things that only Baguio can produce, and therefore, because it is a unique item that only Baguio has, be able to charge a higher value. I can't answer that at this point. I think that needs to come more from the creative sectors. But what I would encourage is that to think very broadly. There are parts of it which are object-based, whether it be weaving or wood carving or the metalwork. But some of it really may be talent-based. I do think Baguio has the potential to be a digital capital. If you look at it, Baguio has among the oldest history of being a tech capital for the country, with Texas Instruments being here for such a long time and training generations of engineers. But how can you, and a lot of the quality education in northern Philippines is here in Baguio. How can you transform that into not just a source that I will be educated in Baguio and move out, but how can you create sustainable R&D jobs within Baguio? And how can you attract real R&D players to locate facilities here and take advantage of the high level of talent? So things like that must be discussed, and certain, let's say, bets need to be made on this is where we will play and this is where we will invest. So those are the. It's a long road. I can't answer it as directly as perhaps you'd like, but that's essentially where the city needs to unify and define its own strategy.
Okay, are there other questions? Okay, yeah.
This will be the last question. Hello. Sir, thank you po sa very nice discussion. Actually, na-inspire po ako sa lecture po ninyo. May business po ako, the Hidden Beauty Floristry and Craft. Pero ngayon, more on nagdodwell lang muna ako sa floristry. Kung pwede sanang humingi ng advice at saka question na rin, meron bang brighter outlook ang craft? Ganon. Kasi yung next step ko na kasi ngayon is mai-open ko na rin yung craft side ng business ko. Pero nakikita ko kasi pag craft is yung madali kasi siyang magaya. Then kung ipupunta mo naman siya sa intellectual property office, magbabayad ka ng malaking fees. At the same time, dadagdagan lang nila ng additional etchos. Then pwede rin na naman nilang sa kanila na naman yon, hindi na sa'yo. Ganon. So yun yung worries ko. Kasi pag pakonti-konti pa lang yung gagawin ko, baka magaya yung design ko. Parang yun kasi yung worries ko. Pero pag ilabas ko naman siya na by bulk, hindi ko naman alam kung proper timing na yung kung may commercialize ko na siya. So yun lang, sir, advice ba kung maganda kaya ang future ng crafting? Kasi bali yung craft ko po pala is siya more on dried flower arrangement. So medyo maire-relate mo rin siya sa woodwork, sir, at saka sa event styling, somewhat like that.
Yes. Crafts are difficult for all the reasons na sinabi nyo. Na yung isang dimension muna dun sa IP development. Yung unang-una, not only the fees, pero I do think this is one of the things na kailangang the Bachi should take a look at as an area of support of how does Bachi, the Baguio Arts and Crafts Collective, how does it have a IP licensing or an IP advising, intellectual property advising unit to be able to facilitate this one. So I don't have the direct answer for it. Dun sa crafts, ang nakikita ko lang na isang trend is the move towards yung tinatawag na experiential tourism versus product-based selling. Kasi yung experiential tourism, essentially ang binibenta mo, hindi yung produkto, ang binibenta mo workshop. You know, the workshop of how to produce the craft. And it is a growing area in tourism, and what they book, they pay a higher fee, in fact, for maybe a half-day workshop or a full-day workshop to produce the craft, and then they buy afterwards. But the act of doing it also gives them an appreciation na, ay, ang hirap pala nito. And then when people appreciate na mahirap pala ito, then they actually give more value to what is being created, and they co-create the design. You may want to visit this website, creativetourism.org. At doon makikita mo yung the strategies behind that movement. So it's not a complete answer because there needs to be really what is the value of the design? Is it really perceived as unique versus what others offer? And the more unique you are, then you are able to command a premium. So in the end, it's really about your design. But in the meantime, if you're looking at how do you scale and before you scale, what do you do? Baka nga a workshop-based approach can help. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so sabi kanina, last question na yon. If you have still questions in your mind, pwede namang ibigay. Or that can be the topic for your thesis, or special problems, or strategic paper later on. Kasi sa presentation ni Sir Paolo, ang dami-daming data gaps, ang dami-daming problem areas that we can work on. And baka yung mga thesis natin, yun yung makakadagdag sa information and knowledge that could help Baguio in its push and para ma-retain yung kanyang pagiging creative city. So, ikaw.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. But ma'am, please do not leave the stage for the awarding of certificates. And may please ask Chancellor Rovillos to help us also with this. So for today, for this certificate of appreciation is presented to Ma'am Corazon Abansi for her creative and invaluable participation as discussant during the Talastasan Lecture Art and Creativity Conversation Series held on 10 November 2018 at the Teatro Amianan, College of Arts and Communication, UP Baguio. Yes, sir. And of course, for our this certificate of appreciation is presented to Mr. Paolo Mercado for his active and invaluable participation as resource person during the Talastasan Lecture Art and Creativity Conversation Series held on 10 November 2018 at the Teatro Amianan, College of Arts and Communication, UP Baguio.
Creative industry product.
Yes. So thank you very much, Sir Paolo and Ma'am Cora, and of course, Sir RR. So before we close for this morning's presentations, may we please call on the DLLA Chair, Professor Rachel Pitlongay, for the closing remarks.
Good morning. So in behalf of the College of Arts and Communication and our Dean, Dean Jimmy Fong, who unfortunately is supposed to be giving the closing remarks but met an accident just this morning. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. So first of all, Nueva Vizcaya State University. All right, so ang layo-layo po. Thank you so much for coming. University of Cordilleras, all right, and our University of the Philippines, Baguio students. I don't have any words of wisdom to give, right? Except, of course, to invite you. Our Talastasan series will continue for the entire week next week. So this is simply the opening, right? But a very important part so that we can understand, of course, in relation to the creative city project of Baguio City and how we can all contribute to it. So in relation to that, on Monday, we will be having the Go Negosyo Mentor Me on creative entrepreneurship, led by DTI, Department of Trade and Industry. On Tuesday at 10:30 to 12, we will be having the Culture Counts mapping the creative industry, a talk by Professor Bienvenido Tapang. November 14, Wednesday, also at 10:30 to 12, we will be having the Adopting Design Thinking in Product Design, given by Professor Palme Marinel Petutod, an assistant professor of the fine arts from UP Cebu. On Thursday, Professor Doris Wilson will be giving a talk on performance art in Baguio. On Friday, November 16, a panel discussion led by Mr. Alan Carino, a Baguio writer, and a group of Baguio writers as well, will be talking on the topic, The Future of Cordillera Creative Writing. November 17, Saturday, also at 10:30 to 12, an IP and NGO panel will be giving a talk on the topic Traditional Knowledge and Creativity, Food Cultures and Heirloom Recipes of the Cordillera. And finally, November 17, also Saturday, at 3 to 4:30 p.m., two FA faculty, Professor Lisa Alagan and Professor Joseph Andrew Carvajal, will be giving talks on specific aspects of fine arts. So we would also like to invite you to join us in the screening of Tanabata's Wife on Sunday here at Teatro Amianan as well. So that's Sunday, 18 November 2018. So Tanabata's Wife is a short story by Sinai Hamada adapted into film. So the screenings are at 9 a.m., 11 a.m., 2 p.m., 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. So please go to Tanabata Wife's FB account for ticket details. And finally, if you look around, we have some very pretty tapestries, right? And this is, of course, in relation to Baguio City as creative city, right? This is part of the crafts contribution. So this is from Nardas. If you're interested, they're for sale. All right. So yun lang po. Maraming salamat for joining us. There is food outside. Please get some food before you leave. And also, certificates of appreciation, makukuha nyo din po sa labas. Please just turn over your evaluation form. So thank you so much and see you for the next week.